So many of you have heard that I was quite under the weather the beginning half of this week. And I was not able to go out and film for the midweek video like I usually do at the beginning of the week. But there was still a video, wasn't there? And it in fact did have moss from the area. Why is that? Because every other time I've gone out over the last month or two, I've gotten footage of moss. Sometimes intentionally, and sometimes it just happened to appear in the shot that I was taking. If we're not looking for it, it hides in plain sight. But when it's on your radar, it starts to appear everywhere. Did you know most of the side yard between the parsonage and the church here is in fact moss? Some of the footage is me leaning out my window with the camera to get a little more B-roll. So I'd be filming for branches and would find moss on the tree trunks. I'd be getting down low for shots by the water, and on the rocks there in the water, moss would be growing. I'd be tromping around in the mud, deep in the woods, and there again would be the green stuff thriving on a rotting log in the middle of the weeds. Dead weeds. Indeed, moss is known for being extremely adaptable and able to grow and live in most any climate. Most moss colonies work together to enable life, where sometimes it is impossible for any other plants to survive. Often in the desert heat or in the winter freeze, moss is the only bit of green life that dots the brown and gray landscape. Life in the midst of death and barrenness. Moss shows us that in the wilderness, new and resilient life can take hold. And I think that's a wonderful image and metaphor for the church. And at its best, the church reflects this phenomenon of resilient life, expressed as a unique result and fruit of living as a community together. And I believe, deep in my heart, that the root of this resilience is our faith in Jesus, who demonstrates to us that physical death does not have the final word over us, nor do we wait for death in order to truly begin to live. In living or in dying, our life itself is found in Christ. And that new life and resilient faith finds roots, firm roots, deep roots in our focus lesson for today, which in many ways is the prelude to Easter in John's Gospel. Now, we are getting close to the events leading up to Jesus' death, and it's just in time for Palm Sunday and Easter here in the Gospel of John. And this incident about Jesus raising somebody from the dead is what seals the deal for the Pharisees. Jesus is too dangerous to be left alive. The following verses right after what Cece read for us this morning pan over to the Pharisees who make this decision. And the way John narrates this miracle that Jesus performs gives us clues that it is unique in this gospel and compared to the other miraculous signs that Jesus does. So throughout our time together the last few months, we've been in the Gospel of John enough to be able to identify a number of the patterns that John uses in storytelling. And this pattern for miracles has been that at the beginning of the story, Jesus performs the miracle, sometimes almost a little abruptly and unexpectedly. And that's the beginning of the story. And then there's fallout and reaction from the people around trying to process and understand and figure out what happened. Who is this Jesus that can do these things? And then towards the end of the fallout, Jesus comes back into the periphery. Well, comes back into focus, but it's on the periphery usually, and explains, whether it's in the back room with the servants at the wedding, or on the side alley of the temple with the blind man who now sees last week, he gives an explanation of who he is, what the miracle means, and what we can take from it. So we think about this and we identify this pattern in the two miraculous signs that we've talked about, Jesus at the wedding, Jesus healing the blind man with the mud last week. Here, though, in this story, the raising of Lazarus, the pattern is almost exactly the opposite. This is a long story. And the further you go in the Gospel of John, it feels like the longer the stories get. There's over 40 verses here. The pericope, which is a fancy word for the way that paragraphs and stories are separated in our Bibles, is 45 verses long. And most of the first half is nothing but discourse, trying to get Jesus to go see and to go be with Lazarus, and trying to understand what's about to happen. And the miracle itself does not happen until the very last 2 verses of this lengthy text. So why the change? We, the reader, are being prepared by Jesus in this moment for a real turning point in the story. Jesus, in verses 25 and 26 of this story, reveals in no uncertain terms the nature of his truest identity and purpose, saying to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" This is the question that the reader is also left to grapple with. But we don't get the benefit this time of seeing the miracle first. Every other time in the Gospel of John, we are made privy to these explanations that Jesus gives to the people on the periphery, after having seen and read about Jesus performing the miracle first. Here, Jesus is promising that Lazarus will rise again. And maybe we, like Martha, start off by saying, I believe that the resurrection will come at the end of days, at the last of everything. But Jesus not only says he is the resurrection looking a little into the future, he says, "I am the life," which he is in the original language really putting into the present tense, the right now. Do you believe in this? So we are left to grapple with this question, unsure of exactly where Jesus is going to go here in this story. What is he about to do? And rather than much more discourse to help us kind of understand which way we're supposed to go with the reading and hearing of the story really starts in towards action and narrating what's happening in the immediate, until the miracle happens and the reader is left at the ending beat of this story, holding this same question and asking, "Can I believe this?" It is a prelude to the resurrection of Jesus himself on Easter. But the raising of Lazarus, who is just a friend of Jesus, is the story that reaches out and grabs our attention and turns us point blank to show the stakes involved in Jesus' ministry. There is true life, new life, resurrection to be had, not just someday far off, but here and now. Still, we find ourselves in this journey, this metaphorical journey we've been taking, in the place of the wilderness. It is still Lent. It is hard sometimes to not see the beauty of spring that is really blooming around us. But we are still in the wilderness, traveling with Jesus as we have been this whole time, finding the holy and inordinary vessels of this world. We've been learning to see the mark of the divine, of the Creator, in all of the world around us, in all of the elements that we live in, and even to find healing in the midst of the muck and the mess. But as we have been making the journey, we are slowly perhaps starting to realize that even against the drab backgrounds, there are little patches of life, vibrant green beneath the melting snow, or illuminated against the harsh desert sun, not just signs of spring that's coming eventually. No, we have been walking with the one who is life, here and now, this whole time. And all along the journey of the wilderness, life has been greeting us, even when we have been unaware. And life has been inviting us to start living, even while the conditions are less than desirable and may even point towards death itself. And so here it is, the miracle itself, life walking right out of death's conditions at the command of Jesus, Lazarus, come out. Resurrection. Life doesn't get much more resilient than that. And as the journey towards Calvary continues, the reader continues to hold this experience and Jesus' question in our hands. And it's the same question that those who have been experiencing Jesus and these miracles and these teachings throughout the script, throughout John's gospel, have been grappling with. Can I believe this? Whether it's this was water a few minutes ago, now it is the finest of wines. Whether this was a place where merchants sold all kinds of things a moment ago, and now it's completely overturned and in upheaval. Whether it's this is a man that's been blind for as long as we've known him, and now he sees. This is Lazarus, our friend, who died and now is alive. We are left with the same question: can I believe this? And there's not an easy answer to it. Bonnie rightly mentioned that there are all kinds of emotions, even from Jesus himself, in this story. And Mary and Martha, their first reactions are to think of the metaphorical resurrection in the years to come. It's to say, Jesus, if you were here on time, my brother would not have died. We are not at the place where we need the answer, but we are invited into life even while we struggle and grapple with it. Now, I want to close our time of reflection together today with a poem. And the poem is written by Sarah R. And if you've been watching the Lenten reflections, you'll have seen her name pop up a couple of times. The imagery and some of the themes that we've been drawing on in Lent this year come from a group called A Sanctified Art, and they give liturgical ideas and liturgies and all kinds of things. This is from their series, Wilderness, which was the Lenten theme for 2020. And Sarah R. was tasked with writing a lot of the liturgy for it. And her poem for this week, I don't know about how it will land with you, but it hit me right between the eyes, and I want to share it with you as a concluding moment for our reflection today. I used to think the wilderness would never end. I called my mom and asked, does time really heal all wounds? Do the pieces ever really fall back into place? Does the wilderness go on forever? So she told me about the horizon. She said, there is an edge where the earth meets the sky. And when you're there, you will see daisies in the sidewalk and the sun after the rain. I asked her to draw me a map, and she cried because she knew this road was mine to walk. But she promised to wait for me. And day in and day out for as long as the wilderness raged. So I walked. And it felt like 40 days, and it hurt like 40 nights. And I waved to the people I passed there in the wilderness. And we tipped our hats to one another, silently recognizing the weight each of us carried. Until one day I realized the earth always kisses the sky. And I looked around, and the wilderness had turned into a garden around me. And I have made it out alive. My mother hugged me there at the earth's edge, and she whispered in my ear that God was that gardener, and that I had nothing to fear. So if you ever ask for a map, know that God and I will be planting seeds hoping to turn your wilderness into a garden. For as long as the wilderness rages on, I will never stop looking for you where the earth kisses the sky.